senseless idiocy, mass hysteria, directionless leadership. I'm talking, of course, about the current state of the single-player Final Fantasy franchise. What started off as a last-ditch effort by a dying company to make one more great game has turned into a continual failure by a company that can't recapture the magic of days past. Despite all the beautiful graphics, insane processing power of current hardware, and bloated teams of hundreds of people, we live in an era where Final Fantasy is synonymous with trash.
It's bad. Like super bad.
Look, when I say Final Fantasy is trash, you're probably already angrily typing out a response in the comments section to tell me I'm wrong. And if you're talking about games like Final Fantasy 6, or 7, or 8, or 9, or even 10, we could even put 5 or 4 on that list, you'd be right. All of those are pretty fantastic and deserve the praise they've earned. And honestly, when it comes to the entire spectrum of mainline Final Fantasy games, there's a whole lot more hits than misses. But the problem is, if we lay out all of the Final Fantasy games in order, we start to notice that the best days are behind us. Between Final Fantasy 1 and 5, they were really finding their footing, and each new iteration was superior to the former one. Then things really get going and they enter into the golden era of Final Fantasy. Then after that, we have a whole bunch of shit. Except for you, Final Fantasy Tactics. I love you so much. Please make more of these, please. I like to call this the Game of Thrones effect. You see, we have all this good stuff back here, like relatable characters and well laid out plots. Then as time goes on, things start to get a little iffy. The series goes in a new direction, and then before you know it, Jaime Lannister is saying this in Season 8.
If not for yourself, if not for her, and for every one of the million people in that city, innocent or otherwise.
To be honest, I never really cared much for them.
When back here in Season 3, he said this.
And stand by while thousands of men, women, and children burned alive. Would you have done it?
What I'm saying is things have gotten needlessly shitty due to lazy, directionless writing. Now, I'm pretty sure I'm the first person on YouTube to talk about the Final Fantasy series, so I anticipate that my subscribers are going to shoot through the roof. But just in case this subject is familiar to others, I just want to preface this by saying that I really want to focus on the heart and soul of Final Fantasy. I'm not going to talk about the graphics or the gameplay or the card-based minigames. All that's fine. We could sit here and talk about combat systems and how many strands of hair you can see on a character's eyebrows all day long, but none of that really matters in a Final Fantasy game.
Hey, shut up, Tetsuya Nomura. You ruined Kingdom Hearts, now you're ruining Final Fantasy.
What do you remember most fondly about Final Fantasy games of the past? Is it the battle system, or is it the beautiful locations? Is it Cloud's terrible character model, or his character arc? Is it Tifa's fantastic body?
Oh, I love those polygons. You look so good. Oh my god.
I'm willing to bet if you're a fan of these games, the best part of each game is the story and the characters involved in that story. People remember the characters as they went through massive life-changing moments that shaped the worlds in which they lived. You also probably remember the little moments, sitting around a campfire with your party, talking to a character to learn his or her motivations, getting a group of people together and seeing how they work together or against one another. You see, that's the heart of Final Fantasy, the story and the characters. No matter how much bullshit you throw at the screen, what's going to stay with the player the longest is the story and the characters. There's a whole lot of games out there that have a lot more features and action than Final Fantasy, but do they really stick with you? I mean, who cares about what you're seeing on the screen if it doesn't have a compelling story? If you've ever played the single-player campaign of a Call of Duty game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those games have all this crazy bonkers shit going on with intense over-the-top gameplay, but do you even really know what the goal was for any of them? I mean, what's the point of all this shit if you don't know what you're fighting for? I bet you can't even remember the plot details of most of those games.
Now, why do you think that is?
But don't take my word for it. Here, let's do a quick quiz. Out of the Call of Duty games on the screen, which one had a plot that revolved around a terrorist leader attempting to take down the United States? Alright, let's see the answer.
Oh my god, they're all the same. Why do people buy these games? I don't even...
So when it comes to story, a lot of people smarter than me have come up with ways to tell a story coherently. It doesn't matter if you're making a wild fantasy adventure or telling the same story over and over again. Basically, whatever story you're trying to tell, if you want it to be memorable, it should generally follow an arc. Now, I'm not going to talk about the entire story arc, but I really want to focus on the two main areas where Final Fantasy has seemed to have gone astray. So one day, you're hanging out in your village with your friends. Maybe your mom wakes you up. Guess what? You overslept on the day of the Millennium Fair, where the life orb is on display for all to see. Don't you want to go see it? Quick, go get your plucky juvenile friend and your childhood crush. Now you can go together and enjoy the festivities. Now imagine if that was the entire story. You go to the fair, you see the life orb or crystal or whatever, and then you go home. That'd be boring. Nothing happened. Nothing exciting happened. Bam! Have something crazy happen out of left field. This is what's called the exciting incident, because it's exciting. Don't you see how that works? What's that? Inciting? I already said exciting. We can't take that out. We're too far in. Normally, this is something that pulls the characters out of their comfort or their routine of their lives and throws them into the plot. Oftentimes, the inciting incident is not difficult to understand. It's something that's very simple in its execution so that you, the player, can jump right in. Maybe the evil empire invades. Maybe the Millennium Crystal or whatever sucks you inside into a magic world. Maybe you wake up and finally have genitals that aren't embarrassingly small. I know that would be a twist for me. Again, don't take my word for it. Look at how other games do this. In God of War 2018, you have to protect your son from some mean guy. In Red Dead Redemption 2, you have to get off a cold mountain so you don't freeze to death.
We don't stop soon, we'll all be dying.
In Final Fantasy VII, you have to fight the power. And in Opie Academy, Big Bouncy Booby Babes, you have to have sex with high school girls. FBI, open up! See, it's simple stuff. Most old Final Fantasy games follow this pretty well. Sure, there's a lot going on and a lot of exposition in these games, but what you, the player, have to do is pretty simple. You see, your enjoyment is not determinate on knowing everything about the world and the characters. You're faced with a challenge and have to overcome it. And while overcoming it, details about the world are sprinkled in until you have a full view of all the elements in the world and the story. So with that being said, let's look at the beginning of Final Fantasy XIII and see what they did there in regards to the inciting incident. I'm taking this straight from Wikipedia with minor edits to really show you how confusing the plot is. Let's dive in. One day there was an incident at the Aride Gorge energy plant, believed to have been caused by Pulse Lassie. Lassie are people made servants of the Fal'Cie, who branded them, compelled to carry out the focus the deity gives them, as they will face cruel punishment for defying or failing it, becoming a mindless shambling monster known as Seath. In Cocoon, the citizens of the town of Bottom are being evicted or purged after coming in contact with something from Pulse. Over the course of the game, the player is shown flashbacks of the events of the previous 13 days, which began when a Fal'Cie from Pulse was discovered near Bottom. Lightning's sister Sarah had found the Fal'Cie from Pulse and had been changed into a Lassie by it. What the fuck? Lightning and Saz derail a purge train bound for Pulse in an attempt to save Sarah. What the fuck is this?
It's too much, isn't it?
Let's compare that to Final Fantasy VII, a game that came out over a decade earlier on hardware that made characters look like this. Avalanche is an eco-terrorist organization. Avalanche's mission is to blow up the 8 Mako reactors that ring the city of Midgar, which is controlled by the evil Shinra Corporation. During the mission, a mercenary named Cloud is separated from the others and meets Eris Gainsborough in the Sector 7 slums. To counter Avalanche's attacks, Shinra drops a portion of Midgard's upper plate upon the Sector 7 slums to destroy Avalanche's base, killing most of the people in Sector 7. Shinra captures Eris and takes her to their headquarters, and Cloud heads off to save her. Basically, both games have the same intro. Some people are on a train going into a city to disrupt a totalitarian corporation or regime. And while Final Fantasy XIII looks a whole hell of a lot better than Final Fantasy VII, they've thrown all this bullshit in. At the end of the day, both games are starting with a typical damsel in distress plot. We don't need the Silmarillion levels of complexity at the beginning. We just need to know who we are and what we're doing.
The ring must be destroyed.
The droids belong to her. She's the one on the message. We gotta help her.
We're not only gonna have to close the beach, we're gonna have to hire somebody to kill the shark.
All throughout the opening of Final Fantasy XIII, you have characters dropping lines referencing all this shit we don't even know.
Not wanting to get purged, I get. But taking on trained soldiers?
Better to die than get sent to Pulse.
Wait a minute, what's Pulse?
Those people won't even live long enough to die on Pulse.
That was the idea. Sanctum logic. They conjured up the purge to eliminate a threat.
Who's Sanctum? Why did they conjure up the purge? And nobody's told me what Pulse is.
We grin and bear it like good lassie, or the Falsey starts making more.
So a Falsey makes a lassie?
Forget our focus. We don't need it.
We don't need it? Look, if we don't figure it out and pull it off, you're gonna be a Sith.
Wait, hold on. There's too much.
What's wrong with you? Why do you want to help the sea? They're the enemy.
So wait a minute, the lassie, they're not Falsey, but they're the enemy, and Sanctum
Cocoon,
doesn't
they're
want to
Cocoon,
but I
decided
no,
that's
we don't
on
on
Pulse,
Falsey,
so
so
we have to
the
get Sarah
Lassie
back
turn into
because
Sith
she's
if they don't complete their focus,
and
which would
Falsey
be bad.
are
But
bad.
Since when have heroes ever needed plans?
Ah, fuck you! We have to save a woman. It's a plot that's been used for centuries in stories. Don't waste my time with all this crap. If you're gonna dump all of this exposition on your player, at least have a fish out of water character. You know, somebody who can ask questions that the player or the viewer might have in their mind. That way, you can start to bridge the gap between all this exposition and what actually is happening.
You fought in the Clone Wars? What is it? How did my father die? The Force? Is the dark side stronger? But how am I to know the good side from the bad?
This is storytelling 101, and the fact that a multi-million-dollar project like this cannot get it right is absolutely infuriating. Hey, how about this? How about a simple plot with a bunch of friends going on a road trip? No, not that road trip. A road trip where you don't have to watch a movie and read several novels just to figure out what's going on. Keep things simple for my small primate brain. I can't handle any of this shit. I'm an old man. Hey, do you guys remember Pac-Man? Pac-Man had a good story. You eat the dots and you fall in love. Oh, look at those Pac-Mans. They're so sweet. Okay, so after your inciting incident, you have the majority of your game. Basically, your characters have overcome the inciting incident, and now they know what their journey will constitute. Throughout this part, you slowly reveal more information about the world and the characters. You do this methodically so that the stakes rise, and what starts off as a simple quest becomes something larger and more important to your characters. In God of War 2018, the guy coming to kill you is invincible, and he works for a god that hates you, and you have to kill him or your son, who is also a god, will die. In Red Dead Redemption 2, see that guy who always has a plan and wants you to have faith? He's crazy. He's gonna kill you. You have to run.
I got a plan.
And then in Final Fantasy VII, the evil corporation is actually sucking the life essence out of the planet, and this gray-haired guy with a big sword is going to crash a meteor because he's mad that his mother, who's a genetic science yes, thank you, we get it. Yes, of the thank you. planet inside of her, and her energy is directly linked to his. Okay, we get it. Thank you. Yes. See, it's okay for your story to have wild elements in it, but all of this has to be slowly revealed over the course of many hours. If you dump all this crap on your players at the beginning, or make it so they have to watch movies and read comics and all this shit before even picking up a controller, you're just gonna make them confused. A good Final Fantasy game, and just good games in general, slowly reveal more about the world as the game progresses. Before I talk about characters, can we just talk about the climax real quick? My wife says the climax always comes too early. I don't know how she would know that. She doesn't even play video games. The climax of the story is where shit hits the fan and everything goes crazy. Now, generally, Final Fantasy games do a pretty good job of this, but the problem some more recent titles have is that once they reach the climax of the game, they keep adding in all this stuff. A good climax doesn't add anything into what you already know. It allows you to face down the antagonist or the elements that drove the conflict and the inciting incident. Like, remember how in Zelda Ocarina of Time, the entire game you're trying to face down Ganon? You spent hours and hours questing until you can finally face him, moving through different time periods and see how he has wrought destruction on the world. And then finally, atop his tower, you fight him in the most intense tennis match in history. Then you kill him and the tower crumbles, only for him to rise again, and in one singular final battle, you duel him on the castle grounds wreathed in flame. Now just imagine if you got to the top of his tower and this fucking guy was there and said that all along he was the one doing all the bad stuff. You would feel robbed. All those times you faced Ganon just to know he wasn't the big bad guy would make every interaction with him, every moment of fear you had when facing him, just feel so much less intense. Final Fantasy games generally do pretty well with the climax, but I fear they're starting to fall into the gotcha pattern of endings. The new Final Fantasy VII Remake was an absolute masterpiece that brought the beloved story into the modern age. But then in the last 60 minutes, the game decided to go nuts and introduce the possibility of alternate universes and intermixing timelines into what was originally a pretty simple story at that point. It was like the people that wrote this didn't think people wanted to replay the same old story, so they added all this crap in there that was new. Hey, does anyone play the drums? Like you can have a nice drum set with not a lot of elements. You got a snare, some cymbals, a hi-hat, and maybe a few toms. And then you can do like everything you want to do with that. Maybe you had a drum set like that as a kid, and then you're going to get one as an adult. But when you go to the store, the guy brings out this set with all this crap attached to it, and all you ever wanted to do was play Immigrant Song by Led Zeppelin. You don't need all this crap for that. What are you going to do with a xylophone? I mean, look at the scores of reaction videos for when people saw that initial Final Fantasy VII reveal trailer. These people aren't losing their minds because they want something new. They're excited to revisit an old classic with updated graphics. That's all we wanted. It's not that hard to make good games, Square Enix. Why are you making this so complex? Now, I skipped over a lot of parts of the story arc because even Final Fantasy does some things right. Most of them have decent midpoint twists. Some of them have better events after the climax than others. But the issue is the glaring problems they have with these sections make all the good they do in these sections way less engaging. However, there is one issue that goes beyond the story arc entirely. An issue so severe with recent Final Fantasy games that I genuinely don't know who the fuck is writing this garbage. You could follow the story arc to a T and perfectly convey a wonderful story and still fail if you fail at doing one thing properly. No, I'm not talking about rendering beautiful bouncy CGI breasts. I'm talking about writing quality characters. The best Final Fantasy game in the past decade was actually called Persona 5. I don't know why they didn't call it Final Fantasy 16, but either way, it's a great game. One thing that game did better than perhaps any Final Fantasy game I've ever played was having a diverse cast of interesting and unique characters. You have the spunky outcast, the hot ditz, the introspective weird art kid, the nerdy introvert, the hard-working mature girl, the rich socialite, and a talking cat. You know, typical character archetypes. These characters are all so unique and versatile that every interaction is wildly entertaining because each brings something unique to the table. Now let's look at the cast of Final Fantasy XIII. Angry Woman. Troy Baker. Less Angry Woman. Young Innocent Woman. Young Innocent Woman who cries a lot. Annoying Kid. Black Guy. Oh Lord, how unsanitary. I know that sounds bad, but really in the game these characters are so flat and uninteresting. Would you shut the fuck up about the graphics? I mean, even visually they look the same. They have the same look on their face. It's a bunch of clones. Compare that to the visual distinctness of Persona 5 and you can see a massive change. Make the characters look, sound, and act in unique ways, and that makes their interactions all the more incredible. The characters that move through these stories are so one-dimensional that it makes most of the game really boring. When your only struggle is external issues like fighting a big monster and not internal issues like fighting with your friends, the story becomes boring. And I know in Final Fantasy XIII they're all fighting each other, but it's just not well written. Like the kid is mad at Troy Baker because Troy Baker saved a bunch of people and accidentally killed his mom, but he's just like whining and it doesn't make sense why he wouldn't see that Troy Baker didn't mean to kill his mom. And look, I know they fight internally in Final Fantasy 13 and 15, but it's just not well written. So don't tell me that there are fights in these games. It's not gonna work. Remember that time in Final Fantasy X when you learned that Yuna is planning to sacrifice herself so that everyone can live in peace? And Titus, the main character who is falling in love with her, has a real issue with this? Remember how that causes friction?
Was I the only one who didn't know?
Lulu! How could you? How could you? Isn't she like a sister to you? I thought you were family. Why don't you do something, Waka?
Yeah, Waka, you ass. Friction is good. We want characters that interact. Don't give me flat characters that don't behave in realistic ways. So we've identified the two main issues in Final Fantasy games: the inciting incident and the characters. With all that being said, let's look at the most recent game in the Final Fantasy series.
We're here to kill chaos.
Not that one. I mean the one in the car. So in Final Fantasy 15, you have a lot of shit going on with a fractured family line and a complex history with political issues, as well as people with extraordinary powers granted to them by a god. The story has all these elements with magical powers in it, like time travel and all this insane crap, but amidst all of that, there's actually a fantastic plot point. See, on Wikipedia, it says this. Wait a minute. What is it with Tetsuya Nomura and having his characters fall through floating debris? I don't know. The group is on its way to Altissa for Noctis to marry his estranged childhood friend, Lady Luna Freya, in a political union. Noctis' kingdom of Lucius, to which he is the heir apparent, has been at war with the Empire of Niflheim for a long time. His marriage to Luna Freya is one of the terms of the peace treaty that is soon to be signed. Now that's a fantastic starting point, and honestly, I don't think the story needs a lot more than that. You could have an 80-hour adventure all based around this. The problem is they can't even get the core of this story correct before they start layering on all this other stuff about bloodlines and magic and fate.
The power of kings passed from the old to the new through the bonding of souls.
By the sacred rite, I will commune with the Hydrian.
When the boy begins his existence on this star, the girl is met by the High Messenger.
I don't care about this shit. Get back to the road trip.
Will work with him to return the light. The girl reaffirms that promise. The High Messenger is...
Oh my god. Another issue with this is that the story starts out with the four main characters having known each other for a lifetime.
So, how long have we been friends now? Let's see, beginning of high school, so that's 5 years?
And they all like each other, so all the tension of the game is external. Whenever the group is faced with a problem early on, they're all acting as a single unit. This is insanely boring. Some of the best games with large parties have incredible moments where party members are at each other's throats and you as the player have to react to what's going on. It's like a Mass Effect 2 where Miranda and Jack are fighting, and in order to resolve the situation, you have to take sides and sleep with one of them, because that solves all problems.
What idiotic bunch of hormones thought that now was a great time for love?
Who said anything about love? I'm just trying to get you into bed.
It makes the experience all the more realistic when you have people of differing backgrounds faced with challenges that pit them against one another. Not everyone is going to agree on everything always, and if they do, that doesn't allow for any real character development. Alright, Square Enix, I'm ready. Put me in, coach. I'm gonna write Final Fantasy 15 so it's not awful. So if I'm writing the game, I would actually have the characters be ambiguous towards each other at the start. Maybe the big bodyguard guy thinks the mission is below him and only reluctantly goes with Noctis, who he sees as not worthy of being the heir to the throne. Maybe Noctis is a sheltered asshole who sees the world in black and white, but as he journeys, he learns that the Empire has actually done some good things, and his homeland has done some bad things. You could have him at odds with the smart guy who admonishes him for not being more worldly, and the blonde kid that likes to run around could be the fuck-up of the group that always gets them in trouble. Have the first couple dozen hours be this incohesive group forced to work together.
10,000, all in advance.
10,000?
You forget it! I already tried it! It's magnetically sealed!
Put that thing away! You're gonna get us all killed!
Absolutely, Your Worship. Look, I had everything under control till you let us down here.
But then as time goes on and they learn to appreciate one another, they start to grow. It would make for a much more engaging and realistic story.
Hey! I knew you'd come back. I just knew it. Well, I was gonna let you get all the credit and take all the rewards.
Hey, I knew that was more to you than money.
Then there's the fucking car. All the fanboys love to go apeshit over this car, but whenever I hear them talk about it, I just get sad. I feel like there's this massive missed opportunity with the car, and it could have mirrored the cohesiveness of the group, like an allegory that you would find in a story. See, what I'm thinking is you have this group of people that don't like each other, and to compound tensions, you have them in a really fucking terrible car. Yes, I know when the game starts it breaks down like once, but generally in the game you can use it to get where you need to go just fine. I think the game should have made this car a pile of shit. Have it break down constantly. Have it control terribly and not be able to go off-road for more than 5 seconds. Make this car the equivalent of walking in Death Stranding. It needs to be a terrible ordeal that requires a lot of manual effort, and it can be the catalyst for frustrations of the group early on. They don't like each other, and they're stuck in this shitty car. It's perfect. But as the story progresses and the group becomes more cohesive, have that reflected in the car. They start to work together to fix up the car, and as their friendships blossom, they find that they can do great things together, and the car eventually becomes this representation of the group. It becomes an awesome vehicle for their success. It's been a while since I've played Final Fantasy 15, but I remember that things don't go as planned, and Luna Freya isn't able to get married to Noctis because she's kidnapped or has to hide out somewhere. It's a damsel in distress sort of situation. Again, we have a problem. The only thing we know about Luna Freya is from flashbacks and emails or whatever she sends to the party when she tells them what to do. In Final Fantasy VII, when Aeris was kidnapped, we actually had time to get to know her before that happened. We learned she's a caring person in an uncaring world that is struggling to survive. We learned she was kind, compassionate, and had good boobies, so that when she was kidnapped, we want to save her. She was kind of like a flower blooming amidst the concrete. Oh my god, she was a flower girl? Wait, flower girl is a term for prostitute in Japan? Aren't these games for children? Oh my lord.
How much?
Well, that depends on the customer. In your case, it's on the house.
Make sure you wear rubber, dude. She gets around.
But in Final Fantasy 15, when Noctis can't marry Luna because the Empire gets in the middle of it, I don't know anything about her. How about this game? How about Noctis gets there and the marriage happens? Then the game slows down significantly. You spend time with Luna. She confides in you that she's unsure about the marriage. Maybe she has a guy that she liked that you kind of have to compete with. And you two have to work together to try to make things work for the good of your nation. She realizes that the marriage isn't about her, but she wants to make it about the two of you and make things work. Maybe you go on little adventures together. Like some town is in danger, so Noctis goes and kills the monsters threatening it. Then he comes back and sees Luna Freya playing with the kids. He catches her smiling at him in the glistening light of the day, and they start to connect. She realizes that even though he's immature and not worldly, he's brave and he wants to help. He realizes that she cares for people and has very nice breasts. They start to click, and just when their relation starts to hit a good stride, bam! Then you have her taken away by the Empire, or have her have to retreat from the Empire and take shelter away from Noctis. I don't know, just do something to separate them after it's established who she is and that things are going to work between them. Am I crazy for thinking this is all necessary? Why do these games tell me all this stuff but show me nothing? Look, I know I'm talking in broad strokes here, and I know there's a lot of parts of these games that can actually be fun, but I really don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the little specific points they do right when there's so much they do wrong. So instead, let's talk about Final Fantasy XVI. The long-awaited, barely teased game that is probably working hundreds of Japanese developers to death in little cubicles while they contract COVID-19. What can we do to turn this into this? Well, my children, buckle up, because I'm going to stop painting with broad strokes and start painting with small little dots, just like stippling. You guys know stippling, right? Okay, so we want to make things simple and character-driven, right? We want to show, not tell, start simple and then build on that. So here's what I came up with in 2 minutes. So you're a wanderer or a mercenary that's staying at this village. Maybe you got lost in a snowstorm and you have to wait there until spring, or maybe you got injured and you need to stay there to recover. Either way, you found a village in the mountains that's welcomed you in, and at the beginning of the game, you meet some of the main characters and you do little quests with them. The people that make up your party aren't friends from your youth, and the character doesn't really know anything about them. So as the main character learns, you, the player, learn as well. You kill monsters threatening the village, you go fishing, but above all else, you learn about the people in the village. They're called Guardians, and because this is a Final Fantasy game and we want to go back to the basics, they guard a world crystal. It could be one of 5 or 6 or 7 or however many you want. You don't get too deep into this lore yet, but basically the character is told that the crystal protects the world. You could eventually go in any direction with this. Maybe the crystals imbue magic in people, and if they get destroyed, there would be no magic in the world. Maybe the crystals are holding back a terrible evil. Who knows, but right now who cares? It's just the beginning and you need to focus on what's in front of you. Keep it simple. You need to recover or stay in this village, and there's a crystal that if it gets destroyed, bad things will happen. Then, surprise, the village is attacked. It could be by an evil empire or some guy that wants ultimate power, or maybe it could be like a political thing where a neighboring territory is launching a surprise attack and their first target is the village. Maybe you're getting attacked by a giant ghost whale. Either way, the village is slaughtered except for you and a few of the characters you've interacted with. Now we're beyond our inciting incident, and guess what? We have to go all over the world to the other villages to warn them about the coming attacks. The party could pick up people along the way and go through these diverse geographic locations with unique cultures and ultimately be playing this cool game of cat and mouse with the antagonistic force. You're constantly trying to get to the next location before they do to protect the crystals, and each time you fail and have to see the devastation because of your failure. You have your characters get disheartened and angry, and while they're growing closer during the journey, they're also being torn apart by the repeated failures. Midway through, you could have a twist and make the villain not so one-dimensional. Maybe the crystals are actually keeping a force of good from coming into the world. Or maybe they're keeping magic bound instead of unleashing its full potential, which a villain thinks could lead to a utopia. Hey, how about this? This will be a nice addition to a Final Fantasy game. Maybe 1 or 2 of your party members change sides as a result of the revelation. Can you imagine how great it would be if a party member you had grown to love and respect was swayed to work against you through debatably solid logic?
And when we faced extinction, I offered a solution.
Genocide.
But random, dispassionate, fair to rich and poor alike. They called me a madman. And what I predicted came to pass.
Maybe the evil empire is not as evil as you thought they were, and instead they just see things differently in a way that relates well with some of your party members. It would almost be like an interesting story. What a concept for Final Fantasy. Throw a cool battle system in there, some card-based minigames, fishing, and characters with large breasts, and congrats, your Final Fantasy game might actually be a contender for Game of the Year instead of a horrible, horrible embarrassment. I don't even know why I'm talking about this. I'm a 32-year-old drunk with a daughter, a mortgage, and a demanding job, but something drew me to make this video. I know there's millions of channels out there talking about Final Fantasy, but I suppose video games have always been such a great gift in my life, and old Final Fantasy games have always been some of my favorites. There's just something beautiful about a fantastic story and characters that go through incredible experiences that test them. Video games, beyond any other medium, can engage you in a visceral story and pull at your heartstrings as you watch characters you have grown to love over scores of hours endure hardships. Watching these people that seem so real and close to you grow and fight and change will always be the heart of what makes story-driven games amazing. I guess I really just want all the fat to be trimmed from this bloated series. These days you can do so many amazing things with technology. I mean, they have horse testicles that sag in the heat and shrink in the cold. There's more polygons on this woman's ass than there were in the first Resident Evil game. I can Google breasts and see more breasts in 20 seconds than the past 50 generations of men in my family have seen combined. But all of that doesn't matter at all if you can't realize a great story. And the greatest irony is that this game had better story on inferior hardware than this game. Final Fantasy shouldn't be afraid to sacrifice complex story elements for little character moments. I want less of this.
The Oracle is no longer of this world, but her thoughts remain, and they must be known.
And more of this. Less of this. And more of this. Less of whatever this is.
But guess what? We grin and bear it like good lassie, or the Falsey starts making more.
And honestly, more of this. For as cringy as that moment in Final Fantasy X is, it's a great character moment when the two main characters are bonding. I would take that over whatever the hell this is any day of the week. Maybe I'm just a miserable millennial suffering through the end times that wants to complain about video games because that's all I can really control. But maybe Final Fantasy could focus on what made it great in the first place and give us a really fantastic experience instead of whatever the hell they just made for the Nintendo Switch.
We're here to kill chaos.
Now if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna do the same thing that all old cynical assholes do when they see things change that make them uncomfortable. I'm gonna retreat back to the safety of the old games that I love and shut my eyes to anything new in the world.